16th. Will the,
Sorry.
yeah, that's what I get for relying on Cindy. All right.
Who's covering for me?
Will the April 16th, 2014 Legislative Committee of the Contra-Costa State Licensing Board come to order? Now, will the members of the board, senior staff, and members of the audience please introduce themselves? I'd like to advise the members of the public that the identification by members of the public is purely voluntary. Can we start with you, Linda? Nancy, sorry.
That's okay.
Steve Sands, Registrar.
Linda Clifford, board member.
Paul Shafino, board member.
Laura Zuniga, Chief of Legislation.
Pastor Herrera, board member.
Augie, you're on. Augie? Augie, Augie Beltram is on the phone for teleconference. And I'm Cindy Christensen, Chief Deputy Registrar.
Kurt Hepler, Senior Staff Counsel.
Rick Lopes, Public Affairs. David Fogg, Chief of Enforcement.
Larry Office, California Landscape Contractors Association.
Yeah. Okay, great.
Christina Jones, Deputy Chief Enforcement.
As Langs, board member.
Ted Rieger, the North Hilbert News.
Phil Vermeulen.
Ifana Lamar, Department of Consumer Affairs.
David Local Pass. Steve Breen, Public Affairs.
Joan Hancock, board member.
Okay, thank you, everyone. The next section is for public comment. This item is provided for public comment pertaining to items on the agenda as well as items not on the agenda. However, the board cannot take any action on items not listed on the agenda. The CSLB welcomes public comment on any item on the agenda, and it is the CSLB's intent to ask for public comment prior to the board taking action on any agenda item. But if for some reason we forget to ask for public comment on an agenda item, a member of the public desiring to comment on the item should raise their hand and they will be recognized. Also, we will be limiting public comment to 5 minutes per individual. Are there any individuals that wish to address the board at this time? Seeing no volunteers, we can proceed. So, due to the rules and restrictions of communication that we have as board members, we can't have chit-chat sessions without having a publicly noticed meeting. And so my concern was, first, my apology to all of you for setting up a meeting a week before we have our strategic planning session, because I know it kind of jams up a lot of our obligations with the board. But the point of having the meeting was, as we have the strategic planning session coming up, I realized that rightfully our fearless leader, Chairwoman Hancock, is going to ask me, what did we do this year for pursuing our strategic goal that we were assigned last year of simplifying this little book that Laura has, that we expect all the contractors in this state, including Joe Plummer, to understand. And I realized I wouldn't have a lot to talk about because I certainly didn't lead the charge in doing much of anything. And so I wanted to have this meeting so that we, as a committee, could air out what this agenda item or this goal that strategic planning group put together for us and what we want to do with it to recommend to the board or not. But it at least deserves the attention of this committee to make some decisions. So that's where this meeting came from. Laura's going to provide us with a legislative update for the items that we currently have, the Assembly bills and the Senate bills that we have on the floor. Then I've asked that Laura help us with just a little bit of a discussion on what we can do on a regulatory level, what our abilities are as a board on a regulatory level, and what it is on a legislative level. So the two different items, right, they're completely independent. And regulatory, we have much more sway and purview than we do legislatively. So legislatively, we obviously have a whole different approval process than we do on a regulatory level. So I asked Laura to give us an idea so that we can understand what the processes are on those two issues. And then And then we can go into a discussion of the strategic planning goal. And simplification is a really difficult concept to implement. And what I would like to come out of today is an idea of what this committee would recommend or suggest to the board as what we think would be a good approach going into next year, and what we think would be a way to get to that goal. Maybe with some concrete ideas, maybe more esoteric and conceptual ideas. I don't know. So that's why you don't see in the packet any concrete motions. You know, the legislative chair is going to move to do this. I'm not moving to do anything. We're going to have a talk, and we're going to see what we come up with. And if we have a motion for something, we'll present it and see where it takes us. And Kurt will keep me in line whenever I step way beyond the boundaries of what our protocol allows us to do. So that's really what we set up. Now, the reason I put two issues in here, I put the 7031 substantial compliance issue, and I put in the bonding requirement issue, really more as talking points, as examples and talking points, so that Kurt didn't get mad at me for going into something that's not on the agenda. So I wanted to put a few things on here that were concrete that we could talk about, so I could give you maybe some ideas of what I was thinking. And then if you guys have some other thoughts, please throw them on the table. So that's the overall protocol. So the first thing on the list is the legislative update. That's item C. And Laura, that's your floor.
Okay, we'll start with Assembly Bill 1702 by Assemblymember Manshine. This bill will be heard in the Assembly Business and Professions Committee next Tuesday. Recommending just a watch position for now, because we're not sure how the bill would impact the board, but the bill provides that an applicant who satisfied all the requirements to obtain a license while incarcerated and then applies upon release from incarceration that is otherwise eligible for a license shall not be subject to delay in his or her application or denial solely based on the prior incarceration. We're not sure at this point what, if any, impact this bill would have on our licensing process. We don't deny a license because an applicant is incarcerated. We can deny based on convictions that are substantially related to the qualifications of a contractor, but that's contained in a separate provision from what this bill is amending. So we're just recommending that we watch the bill to determine if there's any impact on the board.
Any questions on that item?
I have a couple of questions, Mr. Chair. You know, I was just kind of wondering, from your experience, or if you had any idea of what, number one, if there would be an impact on contractors, which you just mentioned that you don't know at this point, but, I mean, I was thinking of what kind of trades they might be able to learn while they're incarcerated. Are there any trades there that we know that might impact contractors? That was one question that I had.
I don't know if there are any specific to contractors. I know that sometimes there are maybe barbering or cosmetology programs or auto repair programs that they learn while they're incarcerated. Those are the two that come to mind. There might be a couple more under the department. So those could be impacted.
And then the other, I guess, thought that I had, if in fact there was recommendations that we would make, I don't know what kind of certification an individual would provide, or we would need, either from the correction facility to actually certify that they have completed a course that is acceptable to our standards as a recommendation.
Well, an applicant needs, oh, I'm sorry, go ahead, Steve.
I don't think it would make any difference. I mean, as long as it meets the standard. Like some prisons do teach certain parts of construction, and as long as they're working under a licensed contractor, or they can substantiate that work experience, you know, there's no reason why we wouldn't accept it. I mean, I'm not sure how much this bill affects the construction industry. As you know, 15% of our applicants have criminal convictions. 95% of them get their license. We don't slow it down. It's just part of the process. From the way it looks now, I don't see this impacting our licensing program at all. That's why we're not opposed and not supporting. It'll probably be amended, but right now we just don't see it affecting us at all.
Any other questions on this item? Okay, Laura.
So we need a motion to approve the watch position, and then we need to take a roll call on each item since we have a teleconference member.
So moved.
Second. All those in favor?
Do
Oh,
a
no,
roll
we have to
call.
do a roll call because we
We
have,
have to roll call,
Aug-
Mr. Chairman, if you wouldn't mind just asking for public comment on the motion to take the watch position.
all right. Thank you, Kurt. All right, do we have any public comment on this item? Any other comments from board members? If we could do a roll call, who runs the roll?
I'll do it.
Go for it.
Paul Shafino,
Aye.
Augie Beltran,
Aye.
Linda Clifford,
Aye.
Pastor Herrera Jr.,
Aye.
Nancy Springer. The next bill is AB 2165 by Assemblymember Patterson. This bill is also going to be heard in Assembly Business and Professions Committee next week. This bill has two components. It requires each board within the Department of Consumer Affairs to complete the application review process within 45 days and issue the applicant a license if he or she has satisfied all of the applicable requirements, and also requires each board to offer a licensing exam at least 6 times per year. For the second component, that won't have any impact on the contractors board. We offer exams on a continual basis every day. The first requirement, we're not clear exactly what impact this would have on the board. We can complete the initial review process within 45 days, but often the application is not complete, or we need to have follow-up with the applicant to get additional information or to get complete information. So at this point, we're not exactly clear what this would do to our licensing process. So, and we're also not sure what problem this bill is trying to fix, as we don't think there's a problem identified with CSLB applicants that this is going to help. So we're asking the board to oppose this bill. We're not, because if we had to meet the 45-day requirement, complete the entire review process and issue the license within 45 days, we can't do that within existing resources.
No,
I agree. I mean, that's unrealistic considering the steps that have to go because of the way it's written and issue the license. If it was just complete the process and get them in to the process, it'd be different, but it's impossible to get that done in 45 days. I would think even with twice as many resources or 3 times as many resources, there's too much information that's having to be analyzed.
well, isn't this, the way this is set up, isn't it, I had this fellow that was doing some work at my plant, contractor that I hired. And he has a person who worked for him who was applying for an air conditioning license. This is all in the last month, 2 months. And he submitted his application, and it was deficient, and it was rejected, and he had to provide more information, and it was rejected, and more information, and it was rejected. And finally, he got all the information in. And once the application was complete,
They still
it
have
was
to go
done.
take the test.
No, he'd already taken the test.
Oh, okay.
It was all this was done. So once the application was complete, the test was taken, the license was issued well within the 45 days. So the way this is written, it says 45 days from the date the complete application was filed, and if the individuals have met all the requirements of the application and testing. So if all that's done, then is the 45 days that unreasonable? If the test is taken, application is complete, all the paperwork's in front of our licensing department, 45 days, I don't think that's, am I reading it wrong?
Is
Yeah.
it business days or calendar days of 45 days?
Pastor has a good point. I mean, all these terms need definition. I mean, this is a knee-jerk reaction to the nursing board problem, and you know, this is way more problematic for other boards. I mean, all those things have to be defined. This is a solution looking for a problem to solve, and, you know, that's, you know, if they want to fix what's going on with some of the boards, you know, they'll continue to improve Breeze, they'll develop online application submission. I mean, that's how you fix those problems. This, you know, mandating, you know, there have been bills that mandate that every person who calls a board has to talk to a live person within 10 rings. Well, we have to hire, you know, 500 more people. I mean, well-meaning, but not understanding the the process. So this is just, you know, it's incomplete, it's undefined. It won't go anywhere. But, you know, it's problematic for the department and all the boards.
Well, I think one of the other issues here, if in fact it does move forward, I think it would be good to ask for resources to implement the 45-day or 60-day or whatever the time period is, based on your own analysis of what kind of staffing requirements you would need. I agree, I think there's a lot of unanswered questions. I don't know what the process is, but you had to probably also provide a whole list of exemptions to the 45-day period if in fact it was to be enacted. You know, I know the process for licensees, you know, there's a lot of things, documentations that you need to submit to be able to qualify the person or have them take the test or whatever it might be. So it would require more, I guess, study and more work.
Just comment, right now, the bill specifies that it's, you'd have to issue the license within 45 days following the filing date of an application, so it's not a complete application.
Right, and that was the point I was going to make to Chairman Chafino was, there's a background discussion here for why this discussion was supposed to happen, but it's poorly written because it really doesn't even address the background. So I do think the safest position for us to take is an oppose, and I would make that motion.
But it doesn't, but that's not, I mean, that's not what it says here. What it says here is 45 days from the date the complete application was filed, if the individual has met all of the requirements of application and testing. But anyway, I think it needs to be clarified. I agree with you 100%. I don't think this is vetted out, and I don't think the language is clear.
We can't support it the way it is anyway.
I can't support it the way it is anyway.
Right, so
I don't disagree.
motion pending.
So should the motion read? The motion be that we oppose it until there's additional, I know there's a wording for it, until there's additional information or until
Okay.
additional.
My motion is that we oppose it in its current state.
Is that motion seconded?
Second.
If I can just make a comment, we could, I think maybe what you're thinking of is an oppose unless amended position, but I don't think that there's amendments we're seeking because we don't think there's a problem that this is going to address. Okay.
A roll would be public comment? Any other board members with any additional comments? Please take a roll, Laura.
Paul Shafino?
Nay.
Are you voting
Oh,
for the
sorry,
motion?
the motion is to oppose the bill as recommended by staff, so I guess an aye vote to adopt the recommended position.
No, I don't.
No, okay. Augie Beltran,
Aye. In support of the motion.
Linda Clifford,
Aye.
Pastor Herrera Jr.,
Aye.
Nancy Springer.
Aye.
Just for the committee's edification, so you know how the process works, when there's a bill like this that affects the department, the department will ask the boards to weigh in on potential fiscal impact. All the boards give that to the department, and the department submits that to the Department of Finance. So the Department of Consumer Affairs would probably do a fiscal impact on the entire bill, and they would, I don't know what some, like acupuncture, what gives their exam twice a year. I mean, I'm guessing, but there could be a lot of boards that would have really incredible fiscal impact. So that's part of the process, where the Department of Finance might oppose it or the administration might oppose it because of cost implications. And if you're concerned about how long it takes us to process an application after everything is in and correct, that's what we call our issuance timeline. And typically, we try and keep our issuance processing below 2 weeks. It varies between 2 and 4 weeks, which is well within that 45 days. If you interpret it as that having everything complete and acceptable, our goal that's established by the board is have issuance within 2 weeks. As you know, the biggest problem we have is half the time the applicants don't submit a complete package, and we go back and forth over a period of months until they pass the exam, get their bond information, their workers' comp, et cetera, et cetera. So we can actually process it, you know, that day, but it's that whole back and forth. It takes so long for our application processing.
All right, Laura, you're up. Next.
AB 2396 by Assemblyman Bonta. This bill is also up in committee next week in Assembly Business and Professions Committee. This bill provides that an applicant or person would not be denied licensure based solely on a criminal conviction that has been dismissed pursuant to Penal Code Sections 1203.4, 1203.4A, or 1203.41. And these are sections of law that just generally describe conditions under which someone may have certain convictions expunged or otherwise set aside by the court. The staff's recommending an opposed position on this bill. There has been similar legislation in the past, one bill that was vetoed previously, and we're concerned that this would conflict with our mission of consumer protection, because we'd like to be able to consider the conviction and determine whether it's substantially related to the qualifications of a contractor.
Any questions from board members?
As part, Mr. Chair, as part of the background here, it indicated here in the first paragraph that when applying for employment with a private company, applicants are not required to disclose a dismissed record as part of the hiring practice or process. Is that true? I mean, where did that come from?
That's information the author's office gave me as his statement supporting the bill. I don't, so I mean, that's what he considers to be fact. I don't know that there's any, I don't know what the law is for private companies as to whether or not they can inquire. Kurt, do you have any information?
I can't, I guess I'll argue the converse. In 1203.4 and following the code, when you have this so-called expungement, the case law suggests it doesn't render it a legal nullity. What it does is essentially, in the words of the statute, it releases you from the liabilities and disabilities from the conviction. Along those lines, those sections of law, at least 1203.4, contain that the conviction, although expunged, must be disclosed on any application for state or local licensure. And so that's the sort of hook that says, even though it's been expunged, you still list it, we still consider it as a conviction, and then we go into the substantial relationship test. So I'm not familiar with what the private sector is. I'm just sort of arguing on the other side, which is the establishment of it in the public realm.
I know that it's required for all school districts. School districts obey the 1203 and require it.
Any other questions from board members? Questions from the public? No further questions or comments? Motion?
I'm sorry. I did have one question. Is this being heard also on the 22nd?
Yes.
Okay, sorry.
Doing a motion
Make
to
a m-
approve the board's, the staff recommendation to oppose.
I'll make a motion to go with the board's staff's position of oppose.
Second.
Laura, if you could take a roll. I already went.
Okay.
I gave him the chance.
Paul Shafino.
Aye.
Augie Beltran.
Aye.
Linda Clifford.
Aye.
Pastor Herrera Jr.
Aye.
Nancy Springer.
Aye.
Our last bill is SB 1467 by the Senate Committee on Business, Professions, and Economic Development. This will be heard on April 28th in that committee. And this contains one provision for the Contractors Board to amend Business and Professions Code Section 7011.4, which provides authority for our enforcement representatives to issue a written notice to appear. The board sponsored legislation a few years ago to provide all of our enforcement representatives this authority. Previously, it was only for SWIFT enforcement representatives. In trying to implement the legislation, we had some discussions with the Department of Consumer Affairs, and they felt additional clarification was needed, so this bill is intended to make that clarification. So, and we discussed the language with the department and reached agreement on this language.
Any questions from the board members on this matter?
I just wanted to ask staff whether there might be any other inclusion of any other, I guess, position or staff that you think we might want to include at this point, other than what you have in mind? Just since, every time you open up a piece of legislation, you don't know what might happen. I mean, I have no problem with the recommendation. I just wanted to ask the question whether, you kind of discussed it and you don't have any other, at this point in time, any other position within the organization that you might want to include as far as the issuance of these NTAs.
Well, the way the law is written, it gives us the flexibility. So, this is what we've been working on for a couple of years. The board is sponsoring this, so no, it's fine the way it is.
And how does the NTA, just briefly, how does an NTA actually work in terms of timing? How does it function?
David, thanks for coming.
There we go.
Dave Foe, Chief of Enforcement. The NTA is a very effective tool when conducting an undercover sting operation. What happens at a sting is someone comes out and they provide a bid for work, and if it exceeds $500, they're asked if they have a license. If they do not have a license, then what we do, we issue them a written notice to appear in criminal court. And the benefit of this is we've already met with the DA in that county and established a date when these individuals can appear and answer charges, which would be contracting without a license, Business and Professions Code 7028. So, just to summarize, it's a notice that spells out the violation. It gives them the address of the court. It gives them a date to appear.
So is this the only tool that the CSLB has for an unlicensed contractor?
No, there are two other ways it can be addressed. Administratively, we can issue an administrative citation with a civil penalty up to $15,000. The other way it can be addressed is we can make what's known as a counter referral, where we write up the case, take it down to the DA. Depending on the county, we may meet with somebody and explain the case to them, or we may, in fact, mail it in. This is just much more efficient because they have something to take with them. They know when to appear, and we've already established the working relationship with that county prosecutor.
Wonderful, thank you. Any other questions from the board members? Questions from the public? Could we have a motion to?
I move that we support, or we approve these, the support position of the staff on SB 1467.
Second?
Second.
Laura, if you could take a roll.
Paul Shafino,
Aye?
Augie Beltran,
Aye.
Linda Clifford,
Aye.
Pastor Herrera Jr.,
Aye.
Nancy Springer.
Aye.
Okay, the next item on the agenda was an overview of the legislative and regulatory proposal development process. What I'm looking for here, what I was looking for here, is a discussion of, a brief discussion, explanation, maybe from Laura, from Steve, whatever you guys think is the right approach, to tell us as a board, how do we, what do we do? I wasn't as concerned about what happens once we're done with our job and we have a bill in front of the legislature, or what the legislature does. I was more concerned with how do we get ourselves as a board, if we advocate a position, what happens from a bill perspective, or if we advocate a position from a regulatory perspective, what happens from the regulatory perspective? Not as it follows through the House or the Senate, or as it flows through, or maybe as it flows through the regulatory process, but just kind of a discussion of how that works. I did read through the materials, but there's a lot. And so is there a way to condense it down to something we can sink our teeth into?
So are you asking when the board decides to sponsor legislation or take a position
Mm-hmm.
on legislation, kind of what goes on after the board's taken that position?
Right. Literally, what do you do, or what does Steve do? Once we as a board say we advocate a position, who does what to whom?
Okay, sure. So after the board, so like the bills that we just discussed, they'll go to the full board at our meeting next week. The board takes a formal position. So at that point, what I would do is I would call the author's office and let them know the board is, if the board's taking an opposed position, I'll call them and let them know. Usually either way, either support or oppose, not necessarily the watch, because we don't send a letter on watch. But if we've taken a support or oppose unless amended position, we'll call them, and then I send a written letter from, that Steve signs to the author. And then as the bill goes through the process, that goes to the assembly committee, if it starts in the assembly, then I will send a letter to the committee, so it's reflected in the committee analysis, which is, the written record for the committee to review before voting, and go testify at the committee hearing. And then would continue that throughout the process.
So you would go testify at the committee hearing?
Testify at the committee hearing, yeah. So if, if we'd had a position on those bills by this first hearing next week, I would send a letter. You have to send it maybe 7 days in advance of the committee hearing. The committee will take up each bill, and then after the author has made a presentation, they'll ask for support and opposition, and then individuals can go forward and testify. And then our concerns can also be reflected in the committee analysis if we've sent in the letter in time.
Okay. So likewise, if, starting from the seed, if staff says, okay, we would like to have a certain bill do, or the board, a certain bill do a certain thing, the staff would draft something up and then try to find an author?
So, right, so later this year, I'll ask all the division chiefs if they have any legislative proposals for next year that they want the board to consider. So it'll come from usually from our enforcement staff or licensing staff. They'll have ideas on changes that need to be made. So then those are what I take to the legislative committee and the board in the fall for the board to consider sponsoring for next year. If the board approves the proposals and wants to sponsor them, then I seek authors for the bills. And then we would be considered the sponsor of the bill, and so then, similar to the process, there's the author for the bill, but then I would testify at each hearing and provide whatever documentation, written materials they need to justify the bill throughout the legislative process.
I think that'd be great information to have at the strategic planning meeting.
If I could fill in a couple things too. Laura also works with authors' offices, like she doesn't just call them and, say if we're opposing and testify and write a letter. I mean, we had a bill proposal that was in the works that we heard about, and Laura met with David and other people, and we did a whole analysis on, in fact, the board took a position
Yeah.
on it.
The licenses on the photos that we discussed at the
We were able
February board
actually
meeting.
to have an author not introduce a bill. And that's the kind of stuff that we work behind the scenes, if we oppose things or we have problems with it. Sometimes we just give technical advice. If we don't have time to go to the board, we'll call the author's office and say, well, the board might oppose this. I want to explain to you why this isn't a good idea. The other thing we also do is we work with industry. If we're sponsoring a bill, we'll ask people like Phil and Larry and the rest of them, would you consider supporting our bill? Likewise, if we oppose it, we try and get industry, labor, whoever might have similar to help support our position. So there's a lot of phone calls. Phil might have a perspective, but it used to be, the legislature was much more receptive to having input on substance and policy. Now it's, I don't know, it's like they used to call us before they even introduced a bill. Now a lot of times we see it when it comes out in print. So the whole atmosphere's changed a bit. I think it's a lot more challenging for people like Laura and Phil and whatever to work in.
I'd say another good example then, sorry to interrupt you, Steve, is there was a bill this year that was introduced. It's not on the agenda today, but it'll be on for the board next week, because of timing, but it's AB 1918 by Assemblymember Williams. When the bill was introduced, and they didn't run it by us before it was introduced, but as it was introduced, it would have required the board to develop a system to track all HVAC system sales and make that available to the public. So what, talked to the author's office after it was introduced and kind of spoke to them about what they were trying to do. And so, because of kind of the strict timeframes of the legislative process and with the board, taking a position, I didn't couldn't tell the author's office that we had a opposed position, but I was able to tell them I thought the board would have concerns because of the cost impact and just the feasibility of getting the information, and we wouldn't be able to do what they wanted to do. So they're very receptive to working with us, and then the bill was since amended, eliminates the requirement for the contractors board and places it somewhere we think is more appropriate. So we'll ask the board to support it next week because it has a good goal, and we're able to kind of head off the problem before it developed, I guess, before it, went further in the legislative process. So I didn't need to ask the board to take a formal opposed position because the author was amenable to working with us.
Now, do we keep a list where we use as a resource for authors of bills that we may support? The legislative members that show up at our sting operations, do we have like a group that we generally try to work with as opposed to others?
Like when I'm seeking authors for legislation?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, usually there are a few members that are particularly supportive of what we do. Senator Monning has been someone who's been very supportive and has carried a lot of legislation for us.
It's Berryhill.
Assemblymember Berryhill did as well. This year, the bills we're sponsoring are going to be carried by Senator Ted Lieu, who's the chair of the committee, the Senate Business and Professions Committee. So there are a few that we work with more often, and we usually look for someone who's a member of either the Assembly or Senate committee because they have a better background in the issues.
So, first of all, you could teach a class on this. This is absolutely outstanding.
I do want to say I didn't necessarily prepare all this information. I found a lot of it.
No, I
so-
can tell that a lot of it was collected, but I mean, it was outstanding. I mean, it was really a good refresher for somebody who took a government class.
Basic civics.
Right, exactly. Are we going to miss, because we just voted as a committee, but obviously the board's not going to meet until next week. Are our positions on these bills going to be known at these hearings, which are taking place the 2 days before our board meeting?
They will not.
Okay, so are we missing something by that, or?
I mean, just sort of Steve?
Well, Laura can talk to the consultant and give them background information, and they can either read between the lines or, Laura can say, by the way, the board is considering a proposal to oppose the bill, and this is the information in our board packet, so.
Well, this is a public hearing.
Exactly.
Certainly, she could say, the legislative committee took these actions, considering that the board listens to the legislative committee, read between the lines, right? But I mean, at least that information could get to them.
Oh, yeah,
before the
Laura
hearing.
works with the consultants.
Okay.
They know to call. Couple other points too is, we don't operate in a vacuum, and like we work with the Department of Consumer Affairs, we need to get their support on our proposals. Unlike a bureau or other state agencies, this board is a policy-making body. You can take your own position on legislation. The department can't. They have to get the governor's office approval. So, and we could theoretically have a position of opposed that the department
agree with.
supports.
Right.
Wouldn't be the smartest thing in the world to do, but you could.
It could happen.
You could do it. So those are a couple other things to keep in mind. And also, even though we're sponsoring a bill, once the author introduces it, it's the author's bill. That author can do whatever he wants to with that bill. I've seen it where boards ended up opposing bills that they had originally sponsored. So that's something else to keep in mind. It's the author's bill.
Thank you.
So, a quick question, just to clarify, Laura. When you go and testify, is it always just when we're in opposition, or do you also go and testify when we're in support?
In support as well.
Okay, and I also wanted to say, I attend Ledge Day with California building officials, and it's my 4th year, and this information is outstanding. This is even more than I've ever seen those 4 years, and we usually go through a little lesson like this, and this was very informative, so thank you very much.
I do want to give credit. The written narrative on the legislative process was prepared by the Department of Finance, but it's something a lot of the state agencies use because it's very helpful.
Well, thank you for not duplicating their effort.
Yeah, right. So for me, that was a good summary on the legislative process. Are there any other questions from the other board members regarding that process?
Well, thank you very much for the overview, and thank you for providing this information. It is really well done, and particularly the definitions that were included here, I think it's really kind of interesting. I guess, just piggybacking on some of your opening comments, Mr. Chair, I I would like to maybe get from staff where you want us as a committee to move as far as maybe being more proactive instead of reactive to some of the issues that we have to deal with. And I was just kind of wondering, this year or for this session, how many bills have we sponsored this year?
This year, we're going to be sponsoring one bill. We had 4 legislative proposals the board approved. One of those proposals is contained in SB 1467, the committee bill. That bill contains lots of provisions, so I wouldn't necessarily consider us to be the sponsor, but we sponsor that one provision. Our other 3 main proposals are going to be carried in one bill by Senator Liu. That bill actually hasn't been introduced yet. He's using a bill that he introduced last year, and we'll place our language into it later on in the year. So it's not in print yet.
Laura, I'm sorry. Laura, wouldn't you say this has been a particularly slow year?
Yeah, this actually is a pretty quiet year. Normally, I would say there's maybe a dozen bills we ask the board to weigh in on, and I track maybe 40 to 50 bills, and it's pretty quiet this year.
I think one of the exercises that we did at the last strategic planning session, I think it was last year or the year before last, where we actually brought the board together and tried to maybe had some discussion on what possible areas we may want to look at. I thought that was a really good exercise where you had the board members and the staff kind of kicking around some ideas for some possible legislative proposals. Plus, for our new board members, I thought that might be something that they might be interested in learning about, because they may have some new ideas as to where we might be going in some of these areas.
Any other questions from board members? Any questions from the public? The other, nobody, okay. The other issue worthy of just a few minutes at least was the regulatory side, and then and whether or not or to what extent we can use the regulatory. And don't forget, what this is all about is getting back to the last year's strategic planning meeting. That was that the board wanted the legislative committee to look into simplifying this book. And so we're going to go somewhere with that, and we have a couple things that maybe we can talk about as talking points. But from a regulatory level, is there really much we can do, in staff's opinion, to simplify this book from a regulatory side? Is it something we can go at it from a regulatory angle?
I would say there's not a lot that we can do through regulation to simplify the law. I mean, we have certain things spelled out in our regulations, but generally the regulations just further define the statute. So, I mean, you can't do something by regulation that you don't have authority to do in the law. I mean, we do specify our C classifications in regulation, whereas we have the general authority to establish them. All of them are spelled out in regulation, but, you know, I don't think there's anything we can really simplify. We could further define, I mean, if there's ambiguity on how the experience requirement is met, things like that, you could add additional regulations, but I don't think there's anything we can remove that's going to make it easier.
Oh, yeah, no, you couldn't change a legislation based on a regulation, clearly. But you know, for example, there's a provision somewhere in there that says that in contracts, the license number, contractor has to put their license number on their contract, on their proposal, on their contracts. Yeah, that's what it says. And you know, what it doesn't say is what if the other contracting party, let's say it's between 2 contractors, for example, and one contractor puts his license number on it, the other one doesn't. There's been court decisions that have gone all over the place as to, is there an obligation on the contractor that put his license number on the contract? Is he under an obligation to get the other contractor's license number on that contract? And so it's not I don't want to micromanage provision by provision from a regulatory perspective, but I don't think it's just, I don't think it's maybe as simple as the answer is no, there's nothing we can do. I think that as we go to simplifying that book, simplifying it isn't regulatory because it's just making more. And the simplification has to come from a legislative angle. not from a regulatory. Even though you could use regulations to clarify stuff, it's just adding more pages to the book. You're going in the wrong direction. And so I do think I think at the end of the day, I go from a regulatory perspective, and I agree with Steve, which is, I'm not sure why bother, because the problem's more in the statute than it is in the interpretation. And so then we go to, go ahead, Laura, sorry.
Oh, no, that's okay.
So what I did, and Steve's probably would be justified in rolling his eyes, what I included in this agenda was a couple of items, and again, they're talking points. I'm not trying to reevaluate the purpose of the statutes necessarily. And one of the things I included in here, was the statute that deals with substantial compliance and disgorgement. And the reason I wanted to talk about it isn't because I wanted to negotiate whether or not it makes sense or doesn't make sense. I didn't want to talk about that. What I did want to talk about is, here you've got a provision in the code that takes up a lot of page and a lot of heartache and a lot of discussion that the court system has said is basically non-existent. I mean, they really have. That's what the courts have done. California Supreme Court took the substantial compliance provision and said, no. Now, that being the case, to simplify the code, should we maybe, as a committee, be suggesting to the board that Laura get out a red pen and go through that book, and if that provision doesn't need to be there, take it out. And maybe we need to take out the provision that has a $2,500 equity requirement on a balance sheet for a contractor. It's a pointless provision. Do we have just a lot of things in there that we don't need to have in there, and should we be going to the legislature and say, let's just take out the junk and see what we have left?
Well, if I might put it in a little bit broader context, the board last strategic planning session made this as kind of a goal for the board to look at the next couple of years. The thought being that, we want to make the construction industry as competitive as possible. We wanted licensed contractors to make it easier for them to play on a level playing field with unlicensed people, people who don't have workers' comp and aren't paying their taxes. With the thought being, what can the board do to simplify it, to make it easier for contractors to practice in this state to improve the economy? That's kind of where the board was coming from. So what we did in the meantime is I asked Laura to start reviewing the whole law book. And she came out of a coma after a couple of months of that. We also asked senior staff, and then we included we surveyed all of our subject matter experts and our industry experts. Industry experts serve in the enforcement program. They, testify, they go out to job sites, they operate for the board. And subject matter experts, like Paul used to do, write exam questions. And we asked them, what areas of the law should we be looking at? And I think you all will get that information, at least a summary of it in the board packet. But I was struck with the fact that there was nothing there. I mean, other than, please don't change the law again and enforce the laws you have better. It was all about going after unlicensed practice and quit changing the law and don't add more laws. Now, I think they're mistaking the board with the Energy Commission and other entities that sponsor legislation that impact the construction industry, which does make it harder for contractors to practice in this state. We have very limited ability to affect that. But again, there wasn't a whole lot of, wasn't anybody saying, change this area of the law, fix this. Some of the things that staff, one of the things I envision, if the board wants to go this way, is we're having our sunset report this year. And I think we should go on record saying that these are issues with the contractor's license law that we think the legislature should address, and leave it that open-ended. One of them would be 7031. Cindy Christensen wrote the perfect amendment to that law, and we couldn't get it out of the legislature. It doesn't mean that we shouldn't, or the industry shouldn't, or at some point, should be revisited if the problem gets worse, which I think it will. We will have a legislative solution when the timing is right. The Sunset Report would be a good place to record that. The other one would be overhauling our arbitration program. We had a good bill. It got hung up in the legislature. It needs to be amended. It would help those people in the arbitration program. I think we should go on record for that. I think we should go on record for saying that the home improvement contract is way too complicated. It should be simplified. It has zero chance of getting out of the legislature, but I still think it's something that the board might want to go on record on. I mean, it's honored in the breach. I mean, it's like signing all those things when you buy a house. Who reads those? I mean, those are three things off the top of my head I think that the board might want to go on record on that would improve the environment, make a step forward. It might take 5 years, 10, but you'll have a roadmap for doing something you might want to do. I want to share that kind of overview with you, and then if we also get legislative ideas from staff. David asked for input from the field people. That's really where we get a lot of ideas. Now, some of them aren't very realistic. We'll vet them and we'll say, oh my God, we can't do that. But a lot of them come from actual experience in the field. Same thing with the industry. We find out about issues when industry comes to us or association reps like Phil and Larry. You know, they'll bring something to our attention that we can look into. So that's where we get a lot of our regulatory and statutory ideas from the industry and from staff, and then sometimes we get it from board members. But that's kind of I want to give you kind of an overview of where I envision this whole thing going.
I have just a technical question. The regulatory portion of it, the board could make those changes without doing any legislative work?
So the board can change its regulations, yeah, it's a separate process, so you don't go through the legislature. It's about as time consuming as getting a bill adopted or longer. It can take maybe 12 months or longer. Betsy Figueroa in licensing is working on a package for us right now. So those you do handle through the administrative process. Yeah, so there is an approval process. It needs to get approved by Department of Consumer Affairs. The agency secretary needs to sign off on it, and the Department of Finance generally reviews it as well. And then the final decision maker is the Office of Administrative Law, who will review it. And then if they approve the changes, then it takes effect as a regulatory change.
Right. I mean, the reason I'm asking is at the QCAT Commission, which is the Cost Accounting California Commission, they have a very big manual, and it's to tell people how to enforce the act in effect, right? Half of the manual is public contract code, which obviously has to go through legislative changes, right? If it's needs to be upgraded to email and stuff like that, right? And then the manual itself can be upgraded through the commission. It does end up having to go through the state controller's office and that kind of stuff, but it sounds kind of like the same process. And so we were able to bifurcate that and actually get the manual updated so that it was functionally useful to the 1,000 agencies. And we're trying to run a legislative bill to fix the legislative part, and we don't know. Obviously, that's, that process is that process, right? So I'm just wondering if it makes sense that if much of that is regulatory, then is there a way to kind of identify what's the legislative changes that need to take place and, focus one activity based on those, right? Which will then obviously have a regulatory process that follows it, because once they change, then you'll have a regulatory process that follows that. And then can you fix the regulatory part of it if indeed there are regulatory parts that could be fixed?
If I might, yeah, we're going to look at the regulations and the statute. However, my opinion, one of the reasons the law book is so big is over the years, it's a lot easier to get a bill passed than it is to get a regulation approved. The regulatory process becomes so lengthy and convoluted, and on the one hand, they tell us, everything you do has to be in regulation, then they make it impossible for us to get the regulations through. So a lot of the boards and a lot of state agencies now go and change the law instead of changing the regulations, because it's more difficult. So that's another challenge we face, but we are looking at both.
But if you do change the legislation, do you then also have to, I mean, are you almost forced to change the regulations that follow that change in
If a-
legislation?
If a statute changes the regulation, then the regulation is either, all it looked occur, it's either moot, or it does need to be changed to reflect the changes in the legislation. But law always takes precedence over a regulation. Kurt, you want to?
Sure. Starting kind of backwards, the purpose of regulation is to implement, interpret, or make specific statute. So Registrar Sands is correct. Given the political dynamics, sometimes what happens is a state agency will essentially say, we'll try the other legislative process, and the statute we will come up with will be so specific that we won't really have to rely on any regulations. We'll just have a very specific statute. And then the existing regulation would essentially fall down on its own accord. I think the issue is, like I said, the purpose of regulation is interpret statute. Sometimes we had the legislature in their wisdom passes a statute that is susceptible to regulation or in de facto requires regulation, and then you're kind of going 2 for 1. You're waiting for the statute to pass, and then you're hurriedly going like, okay, well, we got to have regulations to do this, and then you're doing that, and then there's another statute coming in the road. So, you know, it's quite the conundrum.
So I did have an opportunity to talk to some of the industry about this too. And I got the same response you did, Steve, which is throw your hands up, there's too many laws out there, please don't change and amend. And it was more addressed to, we're so overwhelmed by so much that better to implement than change, because they kind of seem more frustrated. But you know, candidly, I'm more interested in Joe Plummer than I was dealing with the industry, you know, bigwigs. And when I'm looking at that book, I'm just thinking to hold Joe Plummer accountable for that book is insane. There is no way they can figure that out. And so that's where I was looking at it more from a perspective of not the big industry, but the little guys. And was my biggest concern. And Joe Consumer, you know, the little guy, the guys that aren't going out there hiring lawyers to do this stuff, that need to pick up a book and be able to understand it. And so that's when I was looking at it more from an elimination and get rid of than change and modify and perfect. But I do think that your approach of the board going on record for whatever items we find to be, you know, appropriately modified or eliminated, and maybe a list is a good idea, and we just sit down and with your help and Laura's help, and we come up with, go through that book. Laura's now spent months in a coma figuring it out. Maybe that's part of the process here, is we have staff come up with a list and say, here's what we find to be the stuff we don't need and the stuff that doesn't make any sense, and this is the stuff that we think needs to be changed, and maybe staff is the best place to begin that process. Because to go to industry and say, what should we take out, is, I don't think you're going to get a coherent response.
Is it possible that a subcommittee, though, working with staff might make sense? I mean, is that allowed? So you could issue a subcommittee, some of which you represent labor, some of which you represent contractors, and work with staff to come up with that list. At least you would have some input from.
God, I love volunteers.
I'm just saying, it might be a process that might work.
Working committee.
Right.
You know, I'll be honest with you, I don't think that'll work. I think it's got to start with staff and the board. I mean, the industry is so broad and bifurcated, and Laura, you gonna?
I think maybe if we had a starting point, so not, you know, if we take to a committee maybe a draft of something
Yeah.
or specific sections. And there are a couple of different things that I look at it as I try to look at simplifying the law. There's one that's just, from my perspective, it's very poorly organized. It's not laid out in a way that's easy to find the requirements you need to meet. Definitions are all over the place, and some things are defined by exemption versus actually defining the term. So that is one way to approach a rewrite of the law, is just to have it make sense. You're not necessarily eliminating a whole lot of things, but lay it out in a way that at least people can understand it better. And then there are some provisions that just, could be combined or eliminated, like the capital requirement that no one really seems to follow. And so you could try to eliminate some of that. We have a lot of statute on the CMEA, and maybe we can narrow that down because we don't need all of that. And then there are the more significant provisions that the board would like to address that we have not so far been successful. And so, those are something we might not be able to get through, but we are important enough that we want to identify and go on record, and we can have a draft of suggested changes. So we're ready if that ever, the legislature's willing to go there.
It would seem to me that if start with something that can be successful, the low-hanging fruit, if we could reorganize as you just said, if we could just reorganize it so it made more sense. To me, you could tag that onto the end of a bill that says, we didn't take anything out, all we did was reorganize it so that Joe Plummer can actually go in and find the section on administration or the section on this issue. And so nothing got taken out, there was no, all the jots and tittles are there, but it needs to be organized so that, remember, we're here for consumer protection. This is for the consumer, both the contractor and the consumer, to be able to use the book, to use the law.
Yeah,
Just if you could start with that process, it would seem like now it will be easy to more readily identify those sections that we want to peel off.
Well, first of all, Steve, I want to thank you for kind of refreshing our memory of how this objective of simplifying the book really got as a recommendation, because I really didn't recall that. And it is an overwhelming task. I think each of us could go into a 6-month trauma and coma here once we looked at it. I mean, specifically, I was trying to look for the section 7031 in the book, as background, because there was no background information on the item. I mean, I went to the back and I couldn't find that section. So it's a point here that here's Joe Consumer trying to look for something, and Joe Consumer can't find the information. So maybe that is a very good first step, is trying to, get it organized in some way that it's user-friendly. And that in itself could be a task. The other comment I wanted to make is, Steve, you mentioned 3 items that you might want to present as far as the Sunset Review report. Maybe that's where we start. Look at that as a starting point. And the committee just kind of look at those. If that's a priority of the staff, with some help from the staff to give us some background information, and we could start working on those issues. But I think what we're looking for, Mr. Chair, is I think we're looking for some direction, where we're going, because we do think it's an issue that warrants our attention, because this is really overwhelming. I mean, you look at this 12 chapters, I mean, the pages and pages and pages. And I was kind of thinking to myself, well, where would you start? I know in the beginning of the book, it tells you some of the sections of the book that were changed, or some of the regulations that were changed. Do you start with those and say, well, these were changes, should we do further changes in making part of the book simpler? I'm not sure, but even those changes were like 4 or 5 pages of changes that went on during the legislative year. So maybe, Mr. Chair, maybe we should look at those as the first step, the home improvement contract, or maybe we need to look at some studies and see where maybe there's 3 other issues that we might look at. But that might be a good starting point.
Thank you, Pastor. I think I think if we combine the discussion into, I think Laura has a great start, which put all this together in a coherent format, and combining with what Linda was saying of start with organization and then list out all these items that we think from staff's perspective. And maybe instead of a subcommittee that, maybe a subcommittee just to simplify things of this committee. In other words, just pick maybe 2 members of this committee to work with Laura on an informal basis, so it's not can we do that? Where you wouldn't have a committee meeting? Yeah, you could do 2 members, right? Could chat with Laura and work together to come up with a list and play with this, massage it, then what would we do with it? Would it go to the board for an approval? Would it,
The way I envision it, I mean, to me, the first thing to do is not worry about redrafting the law. Come up with big ideas, okay? Reorganize the act, and then come up with 5 sections. Home improvement contract law needs to be simplified. 7031 needs to be amended to make it fair. Arbitration program needs to be amended so that attorney's fees are clearly not like we tried to do. Come up with the big ideas. We will work with Sunset Review staff to see if they think it's appropriate to put in that package. If nothing else, then, you know, I would envision staff coming up with those ideas, bring it to the committee, then you have a meeting with industry and see what they care about, support, oppose. Then, you know, by the end of the year, you know, we have an outline. We're going to have some language, because we'll probably use Cindy's 7031. We could have some specific things, but you start with the big ideas. You can't overestimate how difficult it's going to be just to reorganize the law. That's a multi-year job, because every time you change one section, you're changing sections throughout through the law. So it's got to be done very, very carefully. And so I think that's how I would recommend it. Phil, I'm going to put you on the spot. Phil and Larry, I mean, what do you think about the whole idea of, I mean, first of all, I don't think Joe Plummer ever looks at the law book. I mean, this is for the attorneys and the big firms. What do the guys, but the people, contractors on the field want us to do to make their professional lives more successful? Is it just enforcing?
Stay out of their business.
Yeah, but how? I mean, you don't have to, Phil. I hate to put you on the spot, but you know, you guys represent, you know, these contractors, and are we going down the right road?
I'm Phil Vermeulen. No, again, I think that John Q. Plummer out there is looking at the license board as government. And it's a classic line, you know, keep government out of my business, leave me alone, let me survive. And they're just the simple, boil it down, the basic stuff, what do I need to know to survive as a plumber? Or whatever the trade is what they need to know. And keep it as simple as you possibly can. And I'm not trying to be degrading or anything else, but write it in crayon. Make it as simple as you possibly can. That's the bottom line. And what can I do? You know, and I've been raised in the business. I'm one of those rare people. My grandfather, my father, my brother, all been contractors. I've been raised in the business. So I've been there in the trenches literally since I was born. And that's the bottom line. Keep it as simple. Keep government out of my business, period.
well, I think that Steve, you know, he said, and I think you're absolutely right, Joe Plummer is not looking at that book.
No.
But his license can be taken away and his company bankrupt because he didn't look at that book.
And therein
So
lies
that's
the
the
rub
problem.
is the 703(1)s, which is why my clients, we tried to get that changed, as you know, twice. The license board came in and we got beat up by the legislature each time. You know, with arguments, well, it's just like a driver's license. Everybody has a responsibility to keep their driver's license active. And the problem is that most contractors don't even realize when they move, they don't think about the contractors board, that they should be contacting the license board, that their address has changed. So when they get their renewal notice, they don't get it because their address has changed and it's not forwarded to them. That's a humongous problem. You know, and then all of a sudden they find out because of a smart owner or a prime contractor that knows 7031 and is going to use it to screw them out of their money.
Well, if I might, he brings up a good point. Okay, maybe all these problems aren't going to be improved by changing the law, but Rick Lopes' idea of an email alert system, where if we had the contractor's email address and told them that emailed them that 60 days, 30 days, 15 days that their license renewal was due, that might do more to deal with the inadvertent renewal when they move than changing a law. So, you know, we probably need to broaden the whole way we look at things to things like that to make it easier for contractors to stay in business.
Sorry, Nancy.
Just want to make a couple of points. I agree with what Stephen's saying, and it's something that we've used at the local authority, working with the contractors, and we've found that to be very successful. When something new form comes out, or a new code, or a new item, we do an email blast, and they're very willing to do the emails, as long as we put the subject in there, and then they can delete whatever they don't want to read. But it's more successful than a flyer at the counter, or just putting something on the bulletin board. Another thing, a thought, because I do hear from the contractors a lot on a daily basis of, oh, I don't know, is that a new law or is that whatever? So the book is very thick. It's similar to all the code books and all the new requirements. One thing that we use, and being new, I apologize if this is already available, but is a guidebook. If there's a way that after we go through whatever we decide to do here and come up with this outline, possibly what could come out of that, because I think that's going to be an ongoing task to redo that whole thing, because you start one section, you're dealing with 12 other sections, and it just goes on and on. I think that what we've found helpful is always a guidebook that's smaller and not so as intimidating or overwhelming. A guidebook that points out, this is just one liner of, this is what this is, you want more, go to this section, and it's this page of the book or around this chapter. But something like that might be developed out of this. It may take a year or two, but at least it's a guidebook that could be very helpful. And that's something that I could see that they might carry around with them, or they might have.
Well, as a suggestion, and I'm not trying to play Mr. Advertisement here, but Sam Abdulaziz' law firm does an annual book that's a pared down book that has all the new laws and also the basic things that you need to know. Why reinvent the wheel? You know, they make that available, so that's just a suggestion.
I think that's a good suggestion, because I was just thinking, I mean, should we try to is there a possibility, another source that we might be able to go to so that we don't have to reinvent the wheel? For example, your guide is a good one. For example, important things you as a new contractor should know. I mean, that should be one of the sections of our website. Keep your address current, or whatever it is that you think is important for them to go, or issues that really get contractors into trouble, okay? You could put that, things that you should know, or important things that you should know. But there's a lot of ways that you can get the information out, just a matter of trying to kind of work it through and see what's important.
Well, maybe part of the guidebook, I think it's a brilliant idea, would be part of what Laura's putting together to simplify, to reorganize the code in an organized way. That would be part of that concept, is you could use that pocket guide as a starter for, here's how we'd reorganize it, is put all your administrative requirements in one section, and like you said, that might refer to 7021 and 7093. It could be completely different parts of the book, but it's administrative, so Laura's going to put it in one area for the pocket guide. And we don't need anybody's approval to do that, do we, Steve? I mean, that's not a DCA issue or anybody.
I would suggest too what Phil said, though, because we use this tool as building officials. If somebody's already invented part of that, it may be that you may want to bring that group in that already has a portion of this guidebook.
It's a
already
good book.
for you,
I use
and
that, quite
implement some
frankly.
of that.
Right. I mean, I have the annual Bible, but who reads it? And trying to find stuff in it drives me up the wall. What I do is I also have it on electronically and then do a find. Instead of spending an hour and a half trying to find that little sentence, that saves me a lot of time doing it that way.
Sam's still with us.
Right.
And that, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead, Nancy.
And that's another thing that we have too, there's we use a tool of, it's just a 1 or 2 sheeter, and it's e-looks now. And they're just keywords that you can use if you want to look up a section. You can
Right.
do the search and find, but you can use this word to get to the specific area. It's another tool that can come out of that, like a reference e-look.
I think we are taking public comments, so any other questions of Phil?
And just before
we
Joan
have one
comes
other?
up, I just, the only thing I wouldn't want to see us get into is if we do an abbreviated form and for whatever reason, we don't refer to every section that has to do with the subject matter, and someone says, well, this is something I got from the Contractor State License Board, and this is what it referred me to, and it didn't refer me to that item over there that is the item that ended up costing me my license. I mean, that just makes me nervous, but,
Worthy of note.
Hi, Joan Hancock, board member. So that kind of leads to what I was going to suggest as a final statement. I also was thinking of suggesting that we do like a Cliff Note version of the contractor's license law, but it would have to have some sort of warning that, this in no way was a substitute for the main book. And then I started thinking about, there's a lot of other codes involved here, and I'm not so sure how involved that is. I mean, do we need to get with business and professions code folks and administrative law folks, the people that wrote that section? And then, as I was thinking about the Sam Abdulaziz comment, because Sam does have a discussion of 7031 in his book, I read it, and much more than, what's referred to in our license law book, I started thinking about those folks that put out those books that I hate the name of them, but Contractor's License Law for Dummies. And perhaps maybe what we could do is connect up with the people that publish those books and see if there's any interest in letting them do it. Let them do it. Let them put it out. Let them make the money. Let them have the liability. Suggestion.
Not a bad one.
I mean, they have a book on everything. Algebra for dummies, I mean, it's pretty involved, but I think it's worth a shot. It's worth an ask.
I think, why don't we start with, if Phil, you could just get Laura access to that book, and you have it already? Maybe you can share it with me. I'd love to take a look at it. Any of the board members want to see what that book looks like?
sure.
Maybe you could circulate it to everybody, all the board members? And that'll give us something to start with. Rick, do we have anything like this already? Yeah, sorry to get you up.
Hi, Rick Lopes, Chief of Public Affairs. We do have some various different contractor focus. Most of them, the main ones focus on contracts, things that are required by law to be in the contracts, in addition to having the law book. And there are very specific things about advertising. We have a brochure that focuses on advertising. We talk about mechanics, liens, some of the more specific things. But nothing like a mini version of the law book, though.
Okay, thank you. Kurt, do we need
Rick,
any? Go ahead, I'm sorry.
Rick, just a general question here. When a person gets their license, do they get a copy of the book?
A copy of the law book?
Yes.
They do not. It's available for purchase. Just so the committee understands how the process works, is we have a no dollar amount contract with LexisNexis. What happens is if you look at the book, the first 150 pages or so, the overview kind of stuff, is stuff that we actually write here at the board. The last part, which is actually the laws and regulations, they coordinate all the updates for that. So the way that the partnership works is we do the first 150 pages, make all the edits, all the updates, we present that to them, they do all the back-end things, and then they sell the book. As part of the contract is we get a certain number of copies at no cost for our staff. So it's a no-cost contract for us. They make their money because we're writing part of the book for them. And in exchange, we get copies of the book for our staff, for board members. We also distribute it to a lot of the district attorneys and people in the industry.
Would there be a possibility that all contractors could just get a disc with the book?
I would say it's certainly possible. We do get that, but I don't know how many copies of the book, because anybody who's applying for a license can certainly purchase a copy of the book. It is available for purchase. I don't know by doing that if then that would not hold well with the publisher, who would then probably be selling less copies. So at the beginning, it might sound like it's a great idea to make it available for free, but they'll say, well, hold a second, we're not going to keep doing this if we're not making our money. So that may be a slippery slope to go down.
Well, they probably, like our chair says, they're probably never going to look at it as a book, but it's a very good resource, and particularly if they could, just type in a word and research an area that they need, and they get something for their their money, right?
And quite frankly, that's really the fastest way, because it's a PDF file, which is very easily searchable. I would recommend to Phil, anybody else who comes across it, is we're always looking for suggested edits. And the index is something that we're constantly working on, trying to get more things. So if anybody has things that they have trouble finding, is, bring that to our attention. We'll certainly work on the index, and we're happy to add things to the index if it's things that aren't currently there.
Is there an electronic copy available?
Yes, when you buy the book, there's a CD disc that's in the book, and we also have them available. So if you have one, you've got a disc inside that book. If not, we can certainly make a copy available for you, electronic copy. Yes, and actually, that's a good point. If you do go to our website, when you go into the library area, the resources, when you find that, we actually have a link on our website which will take you to the electronic version as well.
There you go.
So step one in the process would be circulate Sam's book for everybody. What's step two in the process? With this, if we decided we wanted to go, if this committee were to decide, or we like the idea of a guidebook, would that be something we need to present for board approval? What would happen with that?
It might be an objective, and, I kind of foresee a few things we could explore, but future newsletter articles, if you're a contractor, you need to know these things, and be home improvement contract, bond, workers' comp, mechanics liens, various legal provisions that apply to day-to-day practice, and then have a description and a link, if nothing else, a link to our website that would describe each one of those things, so they could know that they have to do these 10 things and where to get that information. And then we can think about some kind of contractors for law for dummies, but focusing on day-to-day practice, not 7031 or how we cite people or what how we operate, but what you need to do to stay out of trouble and be successful. That's what we should focus on.
No, I agree.
And that's what I was saying, just kind of highlight those areas that contractors are getting into trouble with, and you put in, this is what you should know, important things you should know or something. And it could be on the website or wherever else you want it. Yeah, I think that's a really important thing, and get that information out.
One of the things, if I could add, Mr. Chair, is one of the things in the public affairs side that we were looking at, as well as now we do have some expanded video equipment and those capabilities, is we can certainly tackle some of these issues and do, whether they be webinars or things that could then be archived on the website. So in one hand, you could sit there and you could read through a book, or you could sit there and watch a half-hour discussion about an issue, or we can produce things on a regular basis talking about issues we're seeing in the industry or problems we're seeing. And so we can address it in that way and have videos that will be archived there forever.
Maybe which is a wonderful idea. Maybe one way to do this would be to bring it up and stretch it out at the strategic planning session next week, and as an entire board, and get everyone's input, so that we're setting it up ahead of time, where we're not, as a committee, chasing a path that the board won't support. So
I think that's a very good idea, Mr. Chair, that, these recommendations or items of discussion that we have surfaced here, we bring it up as part of our strategic planning objectives for discussion by the full board. I don't know if you want a motion or you want recommendation would do. I think I think that would be a very good way to move forward on this.
I think so as well.
Step two.
I think, Mr. Chairman, I think collectively this committee just has the power to sort of memorialize what it does here, and take the excellent suggestions and ideas and concepts that we've arrived at, and then just bring those up at the structural pest control. That's totally the wrong strategic planning. This strategic planning session upcoming. Sorry about that. So.
Yeah, and if maybe we could, if Laura, you've been taking copious notes, which is awesome. So if maybe at the strategic planning session you could regurgitate a lot of what we just went over for the entire board, we'll do it together, perhaps. And maybe if Sam's book's not too thick, which is the theory, maybe there's enough, maybe you just bring them to the meeting and we have 15 or 20 to pass around to everybody. It's about yay thick.
That's a workbook.
It's full-size paper, but definitely smaller than this one.
We'll pass one around.
I'll try to get more than one copy. Yeah, we'll
Or
see how
just
many we
pass
have in
one
the
around,
office.
just see
Yeah.
how many you have in the office. We'll circulate them. All right, we didn't, is there any other comments from the public, please?
Larry Rolfus from the California Landscape Contractors Association. Just coming up because my name was mentioned and in reference to Joe Plummer and the book. And I can't tell you anything about Joe Plummer, but I can tell you about Joe Landscaper. And they don't know. They don't know what's in that book. I mean, just take alone the scope of the license. I mean, your average landscape contractor just doesn't know what they can do and can't do in a landscape. It's so and home improvement contracts, I mean, they've gotten a lot better. I think that last go around, at least it put everything in one form, but they're so overwhelmed by that. A lot of smaller contractors have just made a business decision to ignore it and hope it goes well with the consumer, and the consumer gets a good product, and that, it's just way too overwhelming. I think the way that the CSLB can help out with that is just more, not so much reorganizing the law codes and the regulations, but just, as was said earlier, more information from Rick Lopes and others, on simplifying it. And you do that with landscaping, with the scope of the license. You have a landscaping brochure that is helpful not only for consumers, but for landscape contractors, and that publication that's intended for the building code officials. Problem with it, though, is it's just not comprehensive enough. You go to it, and there's for landscaping, there's 4 or 5 Q&As, questions and answers, but there's so much more that could be in it. I mean, I have a hard time, and I've been doing this for a while, understanding what our members can do and can't do. That publication, it doesn't mention all kinds of things, that should be in there. So a lot more work can be done in that regard. I like Steve's idea of looking at the big picture, and on the downside of that, it takes forever to, you mention it with the Sunset Review, and then it's years until it, but that's the way it works, I guess, in Sacramento. I do think there's some low-hanging fruit that could be things in the codes that could be gotten out by going through them. Yes, industry should be consulted. It shouldn't be running the show, though. I think industry could be used as a forum to, why not? It's free. You could ask not just industry, but all interest groups to suggest things that could be taken out of the codes, and then, why not use it? And then, you can take, but I'm a little bit cynical about the whole idea of simplifying codes and regulations. I remember Governor Pete Wilson, when he made a big priority of simplifying, getting rid of unnecessary laws, and almost none were gotten rid of. And if you involve industry too much, we'll complicate it. We won't simplify it. So,
I think that's a fair statement.
but I do, yeah.
Thank you so much, Larry.
Could I ask you a question, sir?
Yeah.
Let me ask, you're with landscape architecture contractors?
California Landscape Contractors Association.
For example, would your association, I'm just saying, this is just a question, general question, not that we're taking a position here. Would your association be interested in providing our staff, for example, the top issues that you think your landscape contractors should know about this big book? I mean, do you think you could
Yes.
identify that?
Yes. What they should know?
Yeah, what are the most important things that you think your landscape contractors should know that's in this, or this?
See, the problem is, some of it's not in the book. Some of it is CSLB staff interpretations of.
Excuse me, Larry, I think he's talking about like the building official guide, like what other 10 questions.
Yes,
for
I'd love to
example.
give, I'd love to provide that, yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
I was just wondering,
Yeah.
I'm using you as an association representative here, and I think that, we may want to.
And I have a
work
feeling
with
that's
you.
true of the other trades, too. I have to think that if that book isn't as comprehensive as it should be, I think, for landscaping, I wonder if the same thing is true for the other trades as well. It could be, I think, much more comprehensive, and
Well, I'm just thinking that, now with the water situation and, homeowners are looking for ways to save money, and 60 or 70% of water is going to, not necessarily for home use, but for landscaping use.
Right.
And, there's going to be a turnaround in the way people landscape their properties, so they'll be looking to you to give them recommendations. And I think it's going to be a growing industry for you, your association and your members. I was just throwing that question out, just wanting to see what you're.
no,
what you're thinking of.
I'll put it on my to-do list for the next month, because it would be
well, we
fairly
can
easy to
do it
do
today.
for that, just the things that are missing in that book. It would be great if both building officials and people in the industry had clear answers to in that book. Okay.
Thank you, Larry. So are there any other comments or questions from the public or from the board members? If I could condense this down to what at least I think I heard us come up with as all of our chit chat, is that there is some type of a pocket guide that's going to make some sense. And that's something that staff's going to look into for us. Steve, I like your idea, candidly, of it just being short and sweet and not even, I'm glad I saw what Sam has, because I'm still thinking a whole lot smaller than that. I'm thinking a pocket guide, like, yeah, yay thick, and crayon level, for me, forget about anybody else. So that's on that level, and then on the second level, we have the Sunset Review, which is, I agree, again, Steve, that perfect opportunity to look at it from a perspective of condensing it down. I've never agreed with Steve twice in one session. I'm a little in shock. But using that as the forum for asking Laura to come up with an organizational structure, number one, first and foremost. And then next would be pursuing the low-hanging fruit idea of what's the simplest concepts to go after from a big picture perspective. And maybe that's the catalyst to get the rest of it going. But I think it's a good strategy to at least take us into the Sunset Review next week, where we can chit-chat as a group. So no motions or anything like that needed, Kurt? We're all good?
So I think, like I said, Mr. Chairman, I think you just sort of notate what you have done, memorialize it, and then when the opportunity presents itself in strategic planning, you can say, this was the items of discussion that we think were valid that came out of the meeting and should be considered by the board.
Okay. So, Chairwoman Hancock, are we going to be okay when you ask me what did the legislative committee do about last year's goal? Am I going to be okay? All right, that's all I'm looking for here. All right, in the absence of any further questions?
Yeah, for the board members, for the board meeting next week, first of all, I want to apologize for the scheduling mix-up. We are going to start at 8 o'clock. You will be getting the board packet. In order to facilitate our strategic planning process, if you review the program updates and you have a specific question, please contact the division chief, so we don't have to take up time at the board meeting to go over those kinds of things. We're also, staff will have an outline available to help facilitate the meeting so we can get done in time. We are planning on having a box lunches brought in. I think we emailed you to bring cash for that. Dress as casual, will not be webcast. Cindy, anything else you can think of to? John won't be there, Bruce won't be there, and Kevin won't be there. So we'll have 10. That's pretty much it. Any questions from the board members about the board meeting? Okay, thanks.
Augie, you still with us?
Am.
All right, just checking on you. The other item we did have in the board packet dealt with the bonding requirement. The other item we had in the board packet was the bonding requirement. And again, I was really including that as a talking point that we could easily bring up in the strategic planning meeting. Really, it was more a matter of trying to have enough of a catalyst so that we had the talk we just had than it was about the specific topic. So absent the board members or public having any questions or issues they want to bring up, then we can shelve that for the strategic board meeting.
I just want to make a comment that it was also very well written. I got an education on that whole bonding process versus insurance, and it was very well. Laura, congratulations, and I don't know who helped, but if you did it, you know, it was a really good piece.
I actually don't want to take credit for it. The board issued a report maybe a dozen years ago that was longer and more comprehensive, so we tried to consolidate it and update it, but thank you.
That was wonderfully explanatory. Yeah. All right, in the absence of any further comments, could I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
Roll. We need to do a roll call.
You can go ahead and just adjourn of your own accord, Mr. Chairman.
All right, meeting's adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Thanks, Augie. Okay.
Do you want to look at this anymore, or no? I'll bring it to the board meeting.
No, I'm going to buy one. I want to have one of those anyway, but that's a lot more than I was.